he had cited the text of the closing bracha, blessing in the Amida, which is Sim Shalom, and we say in that blessing, Ki bor ponecha nosato banu Hashem Elokeinu Toras Chaim ve'Avas Chesed. That's the text. God gave us, as a result of the light of his countenance, the Torah of life and the love of Chesed. You know, it's interesting. The Rambam, in the laws of Yesodei Torah, the fundamentals of Torah, there's a mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem. You have an obligation to love God. Every mitzvah of the Torah, to give charity, observe Shabbos, dietary laws, or Shani, whatever it is, whether you're there or not, you could actually force yourself to do the right thing. But love is an emotion. Reverence is the way you feel. And yet there's an obligation to love God, to revere God. Now, how does one achieve within himself an understanding which allows you to love God? I always give the example, Lahavdil. You want to introduce a young man to a young woman, and you give him the resume, and he looks at the resume, one of a kind of a person, quality person, beauty, education, intelligence, everything. And he meets the young woman, and he says, I'm not interested. Why? Chemistry is not right. But she's beautiful. She may be beautiful, but the chemistry is not right. So you say, this is a woman, I can't develop that feeling which is necessary for a marriage. So he backs away. He says, but how could you not? Well, either you love or you don't love. Either you have the feeling, you don't have the feeling. So how could the Torah make it incumbent upon every Jew that you must love God? If you naturally you love, and if you don't love, you don't love. So how does one activate or engender within himself the ability to love God and the various levels of love? Rambam writes there in the laws of Tshuva that David HaMelech's love for God was, as much as he was involved, he never had enough. He had an insatiable need for God, to do for God. That was the extent of his love. He was consumed by love of Hashem. So the various levels. But how do you achieve any level? If a person starts at ground zero, stone dry, how do you get yourself up and going? So Rambam explains something interesting. But just to give you a little introduction what the Rambam says. I always say the Hebrew language is a very descriptive language. You don't have to know Latin. You don't have to know anything else. The words themselves are very descriptive. For instance, the Talmud tells us, there's no vulgarities in the Hebrew language. None. It's called the holy tongue in the Talmud and in the commentators. The Hebrew language is called Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language. It's God's language. Nachmanides writes, why it's called Lashon HaKodesh? Because it's God's language. God is the source of all holiness. So therefore, as a result of it, there are no vulgarities. For instance, how do you say in Hebrew, feces? The way you say feces, it's called tzoah. Tzoah means it's something which the body expels. That's what it means. So it's very descriptive. What is it? Something the body expels. How do you say urine? Mei raglayim. It's the excretion that comes from between one's legs. That's what it is. That's mei raglayim. It's based on verses. No vulgarities. Now, how does one say appreciation in Hebrew? Hakoros hatov. Recognition that you're a beneficiary of somebody else's kindness or goodness. But how's that appreciation? It means the way God created a human being, that if you recognize that you're a beneficiary of somebody else's kindness, or anything positive, the way you create a human being, you respond and you will reciprocate because you're going to be touched. But there's a prerequisite. You have to recognize that you are that beneficiary. But if you have the recognition, a person has nerve endings. If you put your hand in warm water, you feel the warmth of the water. It's just a reality. The way God created a human being, if you recognize that you're beneficiary of somebody else's kindness or goodness, you feel that. You're touched. And when you're touched in that manner, you reciprocate. That's called you're appreciative. And you reciprocate. That's just a reality when God created a human being. Now, the way God, Rambam explains, the way God created a human being always wants to be associated with something which is special. And the more he understands to be special, he wants to be involved and associated with that, whatever that may be. And not only does he want to be involved, because it becomes the focal point of his life, he becomes very attracted to it. And love means something because you appreciate its innate value, you love it. When you have a special person, a special friend, because you recognize he's special, there's a natural love to that person. Because that person you recognize possesses certain qualities. You have a recognition of that person being special. So it's not only you admire him, you respect him. There's a positive feeling. The more you recognize who God is, if you have that level of recognition and you're negated, understanding that whatever you are, it's less than infinitesimal compared to God, and you have that recognition that God is the creator, heaven and earth is only exists because he willed it, and you're less than a peon in existence, automatically it will engender and evoke a level of love which you become totally consumed. But the Rambam says, first you'll become negated. You'll be taken aback and overwhelmed by God's being, presence, in existence. And when you're overwhelmed, you're negated. And after you're negated, it evokes the greatest level of love because you recognize who God is. If you have the recognition and you can internalize that, the result of that is love. You love that. That causes love. I'll give you an example. You meet a person, and unfortunately, the quality of people you've met in the past, it's nothing to be impressed with. And then you meet a person which all the people you've met combined, they pale compared to this person. That's how special that person is. You get very excited. You're really touched by that person. You want to have a relation with that person. And as much as you have, you want more of a relation, because the more you see, the more special you see he is. And you want to spend time with that person. That evokes the love. And that's why God created a human being. So it's all based on recognition. To be able to appreciate the quality of a diamond, if you're an expert gemologist and you see the size and you see the color and you see the clarity and everything combined, you're amazed by what you see. So what you see touches you in a certain way. At Sinai, God, through the illumination of his countenance, which we prophesied in awake state, face to face, he gave us Torah's Chaim, the Torah which gives us life. That is the source of our spirituality. That gives us relevance to eternity. But in addition, he gave us Ahavas Chesed. He gave us an understanding of what Chesed is and how magnanimous it is and how important it is and how everything it hinges on that. Because we have that level of appreciation, it generates the Ahavas Chesed. That's the love, the same idea. When you appreciate something for what it is to be special, that generates love. That's why it's called Ahavas Chesed. Torah's Chaim is just that's the basis for our existence, the basis for our relevance for eternity. But Chesed, it's Ahavas Chesed. That's what happened at Sinai. With understanding that existence only exists because Olam Chesed Yivoneh, because that was through the indiscriminate kindness of God. God had no reason to create existence, only for man to be a beneficiary, that if he chooses right, he's the beneficiary of the ultimate. That's Chesed. So once we saw that and we appreciate that, and we're able to internalize and absorb that, that's where we're going. That's where we're going. I'll give you an example. A person makes an investment, he has a phenomenal return. And from that, he understands, now he knows where to put his profits. But they say to him, if you put your money there, you're going to be busy with this for the next 20 years. It doesn't make a difference. If that's what's going to make my success, and I'm going to be able to provide for my family and to underwrite all things which are important in my life, I'm going there. Every moment I enjoy it because the value has that special value, that special worth. And nothing's too difficult because it may be hard work, but it's not too difficult. Because he understands and can internalize, he sees the value of his work, his input, to have that level of return. At Sinai, God gave us that appreciation, what Chesed is. Once we had an understanding, then it's Ahavas Chesed. There's no way you can't love it. You look for every opportunity to be able to do Chesed. Who could I help? Who could I advise? Who could I support? Okay, I'm just going to share something. I don't want it on the recording because I know certain people said they grew up as an only child and they were never taught or mentored to give, but I'm going to share something with you which could touch anybody. Chaim cites a Gemara, interesting Gemara. The Talmud tells us this is what we study on Tisha B'Av, about the destruction of the temple. The three wealthiest Jews who lived in Yerushalayim, they were wealthy enough that although the Romans laid siege on Yerushalayim, the Jews could have continued for 20 years, providing food, providing oil, providing wood, salt. But there were a bunch of hooligans. They went and they burnt all the storehouses because they wanted to force the Jews of Yerushalayim into a conflict to battle the Romans, which was a suicide mission. Romans had hundreds of thousands of troops with weapons and everything. But that's what happened. So one of these people was a person that he was one of the wealthiest Jews. And whenever he would walk in the street, he would never walk on the ground. He would walk on silk carpets. Okay? And after he walked on the silk carpets, they would take the carpets and give them to the poor as gifts, and they would sell them for the value, besides the charity he gave. And the Gemara tells us that Reb Shimei Choy, who's the author of the Zohar, was walking with the students, and he sees a young woman picking barley from the dung of donkeys. Could you imagine? Do you know how poor you have to be to pick the barley out of the dung of donkeys? And he passes, and he recognizes the woman. And he says to her, "What happened to you?" And he says to his students, "I was at her wedding. When her husband gave the ksuba, the father gave a dowry of 100,000 golden coins. That was her dowry. And look what happened. She's picking barley from the dung of donkeys." So he says to her, "What happened to your father?" So she says, her father lost everything. Father became impoverished, lost everything. And therefore, her situation is, literally, she doesn't have what to eat, and she's picking the barley from the dung of donkeys. So the Gemara asks, but he was such a philanthropist. And the Gemara says that when it comes to charity, there's an expression: when you salt it away, the less you have. When you give it away, the more you have. Works just the opposite. You give less, you have less. You give more, Hashem provides you with more. To give more. So the Gemara asks, he gave away so much, and besides the money and the food, even the carpets that he walked on, once he walked on those carpets, they were given to the poor. Why did he have such a serious financial reversal? So the Gemara says, "Lefum gam l'shichno," Aramaic. According to the camel, its load. Its load. The camel has capacity to carry 500 pounds, and you load it with 300 pounds. For another animal, 300 pounds may be beyond its capacity. But for a camel, it has capacity up to 500. Each camel according to its load. Even though he gave enormous amount of money, but he still could have given more. And because God provided him with the means to give more, and he so-called shortchanged God, God says, if that's the case, I'm pulling it. Taking it back. That's why he lost everything. But you realize, God only does this to special people. He was a tzaddik. Another person who lives high in the hog, uses it. Hashem says, you know something, you'll dig your own grave. Like they say, a person digs his grave with his fork. This person, that's his world to come. But a person who's really special, and you don't utilize it right, God pulls it. So he took it. But if you give what you're supposed to give, God will give you more to give. But if you fall short and you could have given more and you didn't give more, then there's a claim. Just tell you a story. Paul Reichman, he was known as Moshe Reichman. He was a very special Jew. Very. He was, at his time, the greatest philanthropist in the world. The Reichman family gave $131 million a year to tzedakah, to charity. Okay? And then, a Jew was supposed to give 10% of his profits to charity. And when Reichman had his reversal, due to what happened at Canary Wharf in London, he shared with somebody, that year he he wasn't able to give Meiser. Did not give Meiser. And he attributed his reversal because he did not give the Meiser. This is himself. What are we talking about? He didn't become poor. But from where he was no longer that. So what does that mean? From Gam L'Shichno. According to the camel, its load. If you have the capacity, give it. You don't have a capacity, you do your best. But if you have and you don't, so how valuable it is to do Chesed. I'll give you an example. By you helping a person who's destitute, who's truly destitute, what difference do you make in that person's life? You can change his life. You're not making him wealthy, but he doesn't have to worry about where the food is coming from. His children don't have to go to bed hungry. And you're able to provide that amenity for that family. And you choose not to give that family. And you have the ability to give the family. And Hashem gave you the opportunity you could, but you chose not to. So what's the cause why those children went to bed hungry? And why did the gas and electric company cut off the heat? Because they couldn't pay the bill. But if you would have provided for them, they could have paid the bill. So besides not giving what you should have given, what was the consequence of withholding the chesed? That's also taken into account. The suffering of this family, which they didn't have to suffer to that degree, is attributed to you because you withheld the chesed. I'm framing it in a frame to make it easier to do chesed, understanding the flip side of not doing chesed, what you bring about upon someone else where you could have made a difference in that person's life. To a degree, sometimes it could be cruelty. Could you imagine a person is starving to death and he needs a piece of bread, and you say, I'm not going to give you the bread. I don't want to. And the person dies because you didn't provide the bread. What did his not giving, what did it cause? It cost the person's life. There was a story when I lived in Muncie, and the story goes back about 35 years ago. There was this person, a very special person, and all of a sudden, he was in his 50s, he died. What did he die of? A blood infection. He had a blood infection. Why did he have blood infection? Because he couldn't pay the premium for his insurance, And what he had to pay to have that test done, he couldn't afford it. As a result of that, it was neglected. All of a sudden, suddenly he dies. And it was attributed to the blood infection that if he would have had the test and he would have had the insurance, he'd be alive. People were shocked. They were shocked. And we're not talking a big amount of money. They could have raised the money in 5 minutes. But the person himself didn't want to be a ward of the community. He didn't want to take charity. People were unaware that he didn't have health insurance. But you see what it makes a difference? You have the health insurance, he'd be alive. Because he couldn't afford the premium, nobody knew. He didn't have the coverage, he didn't have the test. He didn't have the test, he died. So what is the consequence? But if a person's Ahavas Chesed, and you don't leave a stone unturned, and you find out who the people who are in need, and you try to help them out, what are you accomplishing? You talk about saving lives, literally saving lives, putting food on people's tables, giving a sense of value. They feel respectable. They're not looking for great acknowledgement, but at least they have a sense of self-worth. If you help a person, if you give a person a job, not to pay an exceptional salary, the man every day goes to work. And he can pride himself that he doesn't take charity. And he's respected by his wife, by his kids. They're not on the charity roll. What are you doing for that person? You gave him a job. Well, he deserves to be paid a salary. It may not be the greatest, but it's enough for him to cover his needs. But if you frame it, and as I'm putting it now, understanding what the value of that is, people, they totally gloss over this. But if a person would only relate to understand the value and not doing it, it's literally, you could frame it as cruelty, literally cruelty. Does anybody want to see himself as being cruel? So you want to give me a guilt trip? I have enough guilt. I don't need you to give me a guilt, add to that guilt trip. You don't put salt on the wounds. I have enough wounds. What my mother and father did to me and what my teachers did, I don't need more. I have enough baggage of the past. But this is all constructive. Framing it and seeing it this way, as a result of that, as much as the evil inclination tells you, withhold, don't, you say, something, it's too painful not to. And because of that, you give. Passed away more than 38 years ago. She came to the United States in 1921. From then it was a question of Romania, Hungary. And she was an observant woman. She became widowed at the age of 42. She passed away at the age of 95, 38 years ago. And she was clear as a bell till the very end. And she used to say, she used to give charity, and she used to save the receipts from all the charities that she gave. And she had like a cloth sack, like a pillowcase, filled with all the receipts that she got from the organization she gave charity to. She didn't have much, but whatever she gave. So she used to say, you come to the world to come, and you have restaurants, 5-star restaurants, gourmet restaurants. You come in, and you say, the maitre d' brings you in, he gives you the menu, and you say, and the person wants a lot of money with him, and he says, he asked the person, what does it cost? Cost $10,000 for the main course. Person takes out $10,000 cash. He says, no. Here you got to pay with receipts, not with cash. The receipts make you eligible to purchase the main course. The cash is not in this place. Here we take only receipts. That's what you used to say. You have receipts to show for your life, that you give charity, you help people. That's the key that's the entry pass. Otherwise, you have money. Money has no value there. Money only has value here when you used it correctly. That's what you used to say. Larry,
That's a great story, Rabbi. Can I ask a question, follow up on Bob's comment? I think of some form of Bob's comment, which was good. Rabbi, when you help people in South America